As Lynn said, welcome everyone to the February 14th meeting of the Regional Transportation Advisory Council. My name is Stella Jordan. I'm the Public Engagement Program Manager at the MPO, and I will hand it off to my colleague Gia to take us through a few notices before we get started today.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Stella and Len. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I will be reading our notice of non-discrimination. You are invited to participate in our transportation planning process, regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status, or background. You can read the full notice of your rights and protections at www.bostonmpo.org/mpo_non_discrimination. A few guidelines to get us started. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself if you haven't already to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. Participants may mute and unmute themselves. Always remain muted unless actively speaking. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. You can find this by clicking either the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with the raise hand button at the bottom, or the reactions button in the Zoom toolbar. The chair will then call on you. If you're joining by phone, you can use the *9 button to raise your hand. And if you have any technical difficulties, please contact Stella Jordan via the chat box or by email at sjordan@ctps.org or by phone at 857-702-3675. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant, with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Stella Jordan MPO staff at sjordan@ctps.org or by phone at 857-702-3675. Thank you. I will pass it back to Len.
Okay, thank you very much. So I want to say a few things about the agenda, swap a few things around. First off, if we have any discussion or presentation on the Visual Zero Action Plan, it's going to be very limited, and it would come after the presentation by Ethan on the scoring update, and maybe something about criteria, which I'm going to move to after the roadway pricing discussion. I'm kind of on the fence about going through introductions, but I'm a little bit concerned about the amount of time that we have available for the meeting. So I'll request that if you wish, you can drop your name and anything you want to let people know about yourself into the chat. And I'll also request that the first time you speak, if you want to introduce yourself, that'll be fine. If it turns out that we have time at the end, then we can do intros at the end of the meeting. So with that, let's see if there are any public comments. If you could raise your hand electronically, that would help. I'm not seeing any. Are you, Stella? Okay. All right. So now we'll move to the approval of the November 8th, 2023 minutes. So they're good. They're good, right? Unless you read them and you saw something that's wrong. So I'm going to ask a couple of the regulars to just kind of step up and make that nomination second.
I'll did someone make a motion to pass the meeting minutes for November? Yeah. Okay, then I'll second.
Okay. No, I'm sorry.
Oh.
So I said the wrong word. I said nomination. You're right. It's the motion. And so you're making the motion, and I see John McQueen's hand up.
Yeah, I have my hand up to first, to recommend the motion, but also I did have one
Oh.
minor change.
Okay. Well, I said
And
they were good. I didn't say they're perfect. Yeah, so what's the minor change?
yeah, minor change.
Yeah.
It would just be on the attendees list. To
Okay.
make a note that with Walk Massachusetts this time, we switched over from Walk Boston to Walk
Okay.
Massachusetts. All right, thanks.
Yeah, good. Need to remember that. So great. All right. So with that motion to approve the minutes by Anna Christina and a second by John McQueen, Stella or Gia.
I can call the roll. Len Diggins,
Yes.
Franny Osmond,
Yes.
John McQueen,
Yes.
Ana Cristina Fragoso,
Yes, or I.
Skylar Larrabee,
Aye.
and Owen McDonald.
Yes.
Okay, I believe that is all of the members present. So that motion carries. Thank you all. We'll make that change as requested, John.
Great. Thanks. So now we're going to have a presentation on the roadway pricing discussion by Seth Asante, and this was the result of a UPWP study. I found the results very interesting, and I got to see one preview of it at the congestion management committee, and air quality committee, CVAC, and then another at the full board meeting. I think you all get a lot out of it too, and I hope we have, plenty of time for discussion, and it'll be interesting to see how discussion goes. So with that, Seth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for inviting me to present to this council. Good afternoon. My name is Seth Asante, MPO staff. I'm a Chief Transportation Planner in the Multimodal Planning and Design team. Ryan Hicks, who participated and contributed to all aspects of the study, recently left CTPS to do consulting work, and I want to acknowledge his contributions to the study. This study reviewed roadway pricing strategies and implementation across the United States. According to INRIS, a transportation analytic firm, Boston was ranked the second most congested city in the United States in 2022, and it highlights the importance of the study as roadway pricing is one of the strategies that can be applied to manage congestion and address environmental concerns that result from congestion. Next slide, please. Today's presentation and discussion will review 5 case studies, how they were created and implemented, and their intended goals and benefits. In addition, we will discuss the lessons learned from the case studies, MPO roles, and the implications for the Boston Region MPO and potential next steps. Next slide, please. Roadway pricing strategies fall into 2 categories: road tolls and usage charges, and congestion pricing. Road tolls and usage charges do not address congestion, but raise revenue to pay for transportation bonds and improvement projects. Congestion pricing, on the other hand, applies higher user tolls on congested facilities during peak travel periods to influence travel demand. In short, it charges drivers higher fees during high traffic congestion and less during low congestion. There are several types of congestion pricing strategies, including cordon pricing, which charges drivers that enter designated areas. Variable pricing, which charges drivers higher fees for traveling during congested peak period. Express lane pricing, which charges drivers for using express lanes to get to their destinations faster. High occupancy toll lanes or hot lanes pricing, which allows single occupant vehicles to pay tolls to use HOV lanes. Target road user tolls that toll specific vehicles, such as trucks or transportation network provider vehicles such as Uber and Lyft. And lastly, parking and curb pricing that prices parking and curb spaces based on demand. Next slide, please. After an extensive search of federal, state DOT, city, and MPO websites, MPO staff identified 13 roadway pricing programs for initial evaluations. These are the states and cities where the 13 programs are located. Information on the 13 programs, including the goals, tolling policy, challenges, opportunities, and lessons to be learned, as well as MPO rules, were assembled for discussion at the Congestion Management Committee workshop. MPO staff used the feedback from the workshop to inform the development of selection criteria for the case studies. The states with the orange color are the locations of the 5 case studies selected for interviews. Next slide, please. These are the selection criteria for the case studies. That program was recommended by the Congestion Management Workshop participants. Program goals align with the goals of the Boston Region MPO's Long Range Transportation Plan. Program allows for ease of implementation in the Boston region. Environmental assessments were completed for the program, including addressing transportation equity concerns, and program provide opportunities and challenges to learn from and understand how and why they were implemented. Next slide, please. These are the 5 case studies that we interviewed. The Chicago Transportation Network Provider Surcharge imposed surcharges on transportation network provider trips, such as Uber and Lyft, to and from downtown Chicago. This program was implemented in 2019, and it requires no equipment installation. The transportation network provider companies collect the fees for the city. The high occupancy toll lanes program in Minneapolis and St. Paul allows single occupant vehicle drivers to pay to use HOV lanes. The program was implemented in 2005, and it requires hot lane conversions, adding new express lanes, tolling equipment installation, and roadway infrastructure. The Central Business District Tolling Program in New York City is expected to toll drivers entering Manhattan's Central Business District. This program was planned in 2019 to fund the Metropolitan Transportation Authority's capital projects. It is anticipated to go into operations this year. This program also requires no expansion or widening of roadways. only toll equipment installations are needed. The Bay Area Express Lane program in San Francisco told drivers who use express lanes to get to their destinations faster. This program has been in operations since 2010, and it requires HOV lane conversion, adding new express lanes, toll equipment installations, and roadway infrastructure. And lastly, the Washington, D.C. Penn Quarter Chinatown Parking Demand Pricing Program, which sets parking rates based on demand. The program has been in operation since 2016 and was implemented to improve customer parking efficiency and experience. All the 5 case studies that we interviewed require either state or local legislation authorizing implementation and revenue uses. Next slide, please. Roadway pricing strategies can support multiple goals. Direct goals include reducing congestion and generating revenue for transportation investments. The indirect goals are supporting economic vitality, air quality, and safety improvements. Reducing congestion gets people to their destination on time and supports economic vitality. Also, it leads to reduced pollution, energy consumption, supporting air quality improvements. In Chicago, the surcharge was reduced by 50% in transportation equity communities that are not well served by the existing public transportation system. And this helped distribute ground transportation more equitably. Part of the revenue also generated from the program went to the Chicago Transit Authority to support transit. The program did not reduce congestion very much because the surcharge was low, and there was opposition also from the public and politicians from raising the surcharge. In Minneapolis and St. Paul, the high occupancy toll lane program reduced congestion and improved travel time reliability. Excess revenue after capital, operation, and maintenance costs were equally spent on the corridor and also bus transit enhancements. In New York City, the program is expected to provide about $1 billion of new sources of funding every year, and portions of this will be allocated to the Metropolitan Transportation Authority's capital projects. It is expected to reduce congestion and energy consumption, as well as improve air quality in the region. In San Francisco, the program reduced congestion and improved travel time reliability, and also supported express bus services. And in Washington, D.C., the program increased parking availability as well as use of low-demand parking spaces. It also reduced congestion and encouraged travel by transit and bicycles during peak travel periods. Part of the revenue generated also went to the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority to support transit. Next slide, please. MPO had essential roles in the case studies. And here are 2 examples. In the New York City Central Business tolling program. The New York City Metropolitan Transportation Council, as the MPO for the region, used its regional travel demand model to examine the expected effects of the tolling rates on regional travel, traffic conditions, transit usage, and traffic diversion. In addition, the MPO included congestion pricing as a strategy in their MPO long-range transportation plan. In San Francisco case study, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, as the MPO for the region, also conducted scenario analysis of roadway pricing strategies. The MPO also evaluated benefits from the program in terms of reductions in congestion, vehicles miles traveled, greenhouse gas emissions, and crashes. And in addition, they conducted stakeholder analysis, including the roles and responsibility of key players in the program. Next slide, please. There are several opportunities in implementing roadway pricing. These three were highlighted in the case studies. Revenue from the program were used to support transit and active transportation, such as walking and biking, in building a sustainable multimodal transportation, encouraging mode shifts and moving more people, as well as reducing energy consumptions. As I mentioned earlier, reducing congestion gets people and goods to their destination faster and supports reliable and economic growth. Also, revenue from the pricing programs were used to support active transportation, and this can increase commuting options for transportation equity populations. Next slide, please. There are several challenges in implementing roadway pricing, and these are from the case studies. Discounts and credits and exemptions are used in pricing programs to address equity concerns, but this must be balanced with the revenue collection for transportation investments, as noted in the New York City Central Business District tolling program. The more credits and discounts and exemptions that you give out, that means the less people are going to pay for the program, and then the fees and tolls becomes higher. And that can also raise concerns from the public and politicians. Also, getting political buy-in and acceptance is challenging. Many of the programs, such as the New York City program and the Minnesota Hot Lane program, failed several times because of lack of legislative support. Also, roadway pricing can have adverse effects locally, such as traffic diversions, and that must be addressed, as in the San Francisco and Minneapolis case studies. Also, roadway pricing involves many stakeholders, and building consensus and collaboration were needed in several of the case studies, and that can be challenging. Other challenges also include uncertainty. Many of the programs did not plan for COVID-19, which impacted several of the programs, and they were not accounted for in the planning stages. Next slide, please. These are some of the lessons learned from the case studies. Legislation is essential in all the 5 case studies. Engage stakeholders early in the process, and they were a significant component in the New York City and San Francisco case studies. All 5 case studies also conveyed the benefits of the program to the public and politicians and de-emphasized revenue uses. Also ensured that day one options are available, such as transit and active transportation modes, to accommodate those who shift trips from vehicular travel to transit. And all the case studies also required monitoring of the program constantly to make necessary changes so that the program can meet its goals. And also have adequate and specialized staff to manage the program, such as data scientists, lawyers, and environmental scientists. Next slide, please. One purpose of this study was to explore what goals a roadway pricing program should support in our MPO region. And this topic was discussed at the Congestion Management Committee workshop. The workshop participants suggested that pricing programs should support economic growth and also be connected to the long-range transportation plan goals, including reducing pollution, congestion, addressing transportation equity issues, and support sustainable transportation. Next slide, please. Having explored the opportunities, the challenges, and lessons to be learned from the case studies, MPO staff is working on potential next steps for the Boston region. And they include activities such as conducting stakeholder analysis to gauge the interest and influence of stakeholders, engaging transportation equity communities and underrepresented populations, also to hear their opinions, determining what pricing strategies are suitable for the Boston region MPO, workshopping goals with the MPO boards and linking this with the long-range transportation plan and the transportation improvement program, and conducting scenario analysis with the regional travel demand model of program performance and benefits. Next slide, please. I will end here and turn it back to the chair to facilitate questions and answers and discussion about this work. And these are some of the questions for discussion about how the MPO should move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Seth. It's great, and leave this slide up for a little bit, and so folks, you can ask questions and discuss any part of Seth's presentation that you'd like, and if you want to focus on these questions, it's fine too. I'll say with respect to these questions, I'm going to grab a screenshot of it because I think it'll be worthy of us discussing at a later meeting, so Mr. McQueen.
Yeah, thank you, Seth, for conveying that. Kind of interesting. Several questions, I guess. I was wondering why Washington State wasn't included, because I think they implement vehicle miles traveled, not tolling, but for all vehicles. So it'd be sort of like a utility meter, so to speak, on your house for electricity, where you get paid, the state gets paid for the miles of degradation that are actually a result of the car and its mileage. Secondly, I guess we really don't have anything that's actionable, at least right now, here. I noticed that in today's news that congestion pricing is going to be coming in front of at least the Boston City Council, if not the folks at Beacon Hill, I guess in the next day or so. But we don't really have a mechanism to really accomplish any massive, let's say, congestion pricing that could be effective or at least close to equitable, not to equity populations, but to the population at large, given that we are limited in terms of our tolling facilities. And we need I think we need a federal legislation to expand those beyond. I mean, for instance, we only have Tobin Bridge and the Mass Pike, as far as I know, that are available for tolling, whereas 93 is not either end of it. And you know, a number of the other major roads that would be implemented in congestion pricing wouldn't be able to be addressed. I guess more importantly, looking at the LRTP and some of the information, it would seem from, I guess, our published data that by 2050, 93% of the vehicles, cars, trucks, large trucks, small trucks, personal automobiles, will be electric powered. And that's published, I think, by MassDOT and others. So they are not, they would be environmentally friendly and would not really be subject to being targeted for diversion or for, you know, why not open it up? They're not a problem with greenhouse gases. And it seems like, according to the statistics that I saw, moving forward, it's only a minimal amount of people that would be, by 2050, by the current situations, that would be using transit. And I think that isn't broken down. I would imagine be a larger shift, or actually larger usage in the core areas. But beyond that, which I think is a lot of the population, it's not a big deal. So why not make sure we have more funds for the state of good repair, adequate parking at transit stations, and adequate parking in general?
Okay, so I think that first set, of words was the question about why Washington State was included. So we'll direct that to Seth, and then after that we can respond to the other 2 points. So Seth.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. We reviewed the Washington State's program, and as you mentioned, they have this vehicle might travel charges. That is like, as you mentioned, depends on how much you traveled in a year, and then they apply the vehicles miles travel, charge that amount of travel that you made. We reviewed several programs, about 20 of them, and we presented 13 to the Congestion Management Committee. And based on their feedback that we used to develop the selection criteria, we wanted to focus on congestion pricing. So we selected these 5 that we felt has a lot of variety in them. But besides these 5 case studies, there are other several examples of pricing strategies, as you mentioned, the Washington State program, which used the VMT, but we weren't able to analyze all the different kinds of pricing strategies available. So we are aware of the VMT pricing strategy, and a lot of states are also looking into that because the revenue from gas taxes are going down and it has to be replaced by something. And this VMT charges is one of the strategies that some of the states are looking at, and is being implemented in the Washington State. So we are aware of that, but that wasn't selected as one of the case studies.
I guess that question, the strategy for excluding them, because I would see that VMT, especially with GPS capabilities being sophisticated as they are, and privacy being sophisticated for the users, that's the way that it has to be, given the lack of revenue from gas, and that it's completely scalable in terms of addressing congestion periods, places, locations, every mile where you went, and whether you went and whether you diverted from some of the high congestion areas or whatever, but it would track that and could, for those areas, penalize the driver, let's say, for indulging in the congestion period, things like that, and could be scaled to provide reductions in charges to a disadvantaged community and their registered people. So I mean, that's something I think that we really need to get on top of and aggressively pursue, despite the public pushback on that I think is going to be overcome in probably 20 years or 30 years.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead,
agree
Steph.
with you. The VMT mileage charges is one of the things maybe we should look into moving forward.
It's the only.
For this study.
Yeah. So I think that fits under the follow-up category, and maybe even, what work could be planned, in the UPWP, so yeah, that comes out of that, and so the other 2 points that you made, was regarding actionability. Well, this is the beginning of the process, John, so, and, it's good to get in on the beginning, because that way we can have hopefully a little more influence on things, and influence as to what does become actionable. So that's where we are. And what's your last point?
Well, I think it was
the EVs.
Yeah, EVs, and that kind of fits in, with the first point. But you want to say? I think both of you are going to say something. I'll stop talking and let one of you go.
Yeah. So if 93% of the motor vehicles by 2050 are, which is almost all of them, and figure by 2040 you're probably going to have a majority of them. If they're not a problem in terms of the greenhouse gases,
right?
Why target them? Why not embrace them?
It doesn't matter how you target them, right? I mean, so it could be that they get a discount maybe for the way they use the road, especially if it goes towards a VMT model. Then the way you use the road determines how you pay for it. So go ahead, Seth.
Yeah, in San Francisco, their program that they have now, EVs gets discounts, but in the future, the new program they are going to come out with will charge all vehicles, and EV will be excluded, because they believe by 2050, the amount of EV vehicles will be so high that it wouldn't matter. So they will exclude EV from the program.
Right.
However, I guess we're
okay. Well, John,
I guess where the rest of that question goes is that we seem to be still pushing a priority for transit expenditures and everything going to transit in terms of whatever incremental money from tolls and things like that. Whereas the transit really seems to be topping out in terms of the percentage. So maybe just their state of good repair should be funded and more money should be allocated to enabling the EVs.
Gotcha, understand.
Mhm.
You know, so we're gonna let that be a statement at this point and hang there because I'm gonna try and get out of this segment maybe by 3:15, and I see Franny's hand up.
But I have a barking dog, so
Not hearing it.
I might have
Now
to
we hear it.
postpone till after someone else. Well, I'll just say
Now we hear
quickly,
it.
that I really, first of all, I really appreciate your presentation, Seth. Maybe I'm showing my age, but I really like your slow way of talking. It helped me understand. I don't know, I've noticed this before when you give presentations. It's very nice. And I also want, oh, is this too annoying, or should I keep speaking?
It's fine.
Okay.
It is what it is. I mean,
I-
thanks.
I just would want to hope that the MPO wouldn't just delay. It looks like these were a success in the other places, although there was a benefits page, but there wasn't a con page, you know, the things that went wrong. But assuming that it was beneficial in these other areas, it seems to me that the Boston MPO, I sort of was disappointed to see that we would think about doing more studies and come up with a policy framework. Maybe this is the way everything has to go, but I just didn't want to repeat studying. If it looks like it works in another place, I'd rather put the money that would be put into a study into a pilot and just see how it works. I would want to be more brave than that and faster.
Yeah, we know that congestion pricing is one of the strategies that can be used to address several problems from air quality, energy consumption, and several others. So now we know of the benefits, but as you know, it involves charging during congestion. And before you do that, you have to make sure also that you have the necessary transit services or active transportation modes facilities to support those who will move from vehicular trips to transit trips. And this is where you have to have a dialogue to make sure that the public understand and also have the support from the public. So although we know the benefits, still we need some studies and to build up some stakeholder collaboration and public support before such a program can move forward.
Yes, yes. I mean, and looking at those two questions in the middle, Franny and everyone else, it's like who else needs to be involved in the conversation? I think we should think about that. I mean, especially given our role in as the advisory council and what is the MPO's specific role in this work. Once again, we can help the rest of the board understand, at least exchange our point of view on this. So that's up for us to do. And like I said, we want to follow up on this some more. So I saw Anna Christina hands up.
Len, I just wanted to add that who needs to be involved in the conversation. I think early on we should involve the private sector in it.
Right. And then we'll try and find some specific people or recommend specific people. So we'll go from general to specific. But yeah, we'll have more of this conversation because there's also an MBTA element that was that we should discuss. That was presented at the last board meeting. So they're looking at this with respect, or this concept with respect to providing funds for the MBTA. And as you know, the governor has started transportation funding task force meeting. And so the time is right for this conversation. So, Anna Christina, are you still wanting to talk?
No, I was in support of what Franny was saying. I'd rather see the money go into a pilot because I think there are big conversations that are going to have to be addressed where, you're going to have subsidies for business. You're going to have subsidies for people who can't afford to drive and need to get to a certain place on time. You're going to have people that will purposely come in when it's low cost and create all sorts of weird hour traffic jams that you can't depend on. Or anything, like a lot of things I think would come out of a pilot. I would rather see a pilot get done.
All right, and maybe we will find ourselves either in a position to make a formal recommendation, or by virtue of meeting with various people and having them participate in dialogue with us, they'll get a good sense of what we would like to see happen, both as individuals and as a group. So with that, we're going to move on to the next part of the agenda after thanking Seth once again for a great presentation and for stimulating an excellent conversation. Anytime you want to talk with us more about this or anything else, just let us know. We'll invite you when we're thinking about it. But if you think about us first, just let us know. Be happy to have you. Okay. Okay. You're welcome.
Thank you.
So next we're gonna move to Ethan, and he's going to discuss the tip scoring and maybe some criteria discussion.
Yeah, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ethan Lapointe. I'm the Transportation Improvement Program Manager with the Boston Region MPO. My presentation here today is to provide a brief scoring update, not a full scoring overview on the federal fiscal years 2025 to 29 TIP. If we go on to the next slide, just to give you a high-level review on what this presentation is going to cover. I'll give an overview on the project portfolio, the projects we received applications for thus far in federal fiscal years 25 through 9. Go break that out by which projects fall into which MPO investment program. Have a couple comments on how the new evaluation criteria that was implemented for this project cycle, namely after the adoption of the long-range plan, has played out with regard to how projects are stacking up against one another, and also close with just some upcoming tip dates to keep an eye on if you would like to learn more as to how the federal fiscal years 25-29 tip development is shaping up. And then I'll just wrap up with some time for question and answer. So if we can go on to the next slide, I'll start off with just some graphs and the one after that to show projects by investment program. So at a high level, MPO staff have received 29 project applications so far and are expecting a 30th project application. This graph on screen shows that 10 of those were for the Community Connections program, 15 for the project design pilot, which covers all investment programs but Community Connections, the core investment programs, which refers to the Bike PED, Complete Streets and Intersection Improvement programs, in addition to major infrastructure, but that isn't applied for generally. And lastly, the Transit Transformation Program, which had 1 application. And also just to reiterate, there are 4 applications for the core investment programs as well, that light blue line. To kind of break this out into projects by investment program and phase on the next slide, looking at...
Actually, quick question, Ethan, before we go back. So what do you mean by the core programs aren't applied for?
I should clarify that. So for major infrastructure specifically, which is an MPO investment program, that investment program is a classification applied to a project based on whether or not it meets certain qualifications set forth by the LRTP, whereas the classification of other investment programs is usually dependent on the scope of work. So many projects in the major infrastructure program would otherwise be classified as complete streets, for example, or intersection improvements. As is the case with some of them.
All right, and then we just reclassify them, or?
Exactly, yes. And some transit projects too may be classified as major infrastructure as well.
Okay, I got you. Okay, all right. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. It's not exclusive. They're rather mutual. And that's a good point of clarification there too, because there's some lingo and jargon here that this often gets wrapped up in. So just to look at the Bike PED, Complete Streets and Intersection Improvements projects all together, consolidating that bar of the 15 design projects and the 4 construction projects, there are 5 bicycle and pedestrian projects total, with 1 seeking construction funding and 4 for design, 10 in complete streets, with 8 in design and 2 in construction, and then 4 in intersection improvements with 3 in design and 1 in construction, or at least as far as where they are seeking funding for there. To go into the Community Connections program on the next slide, we have a similar breakout, this one by investment type. The Community Connections program, as a first and last mile kind of catch-all investment program, covers a variety of different investment classifications. So among the 10 applications, there was 1 for bicycle lanes, 3 for the procurement of new bicycle racks, 5 for the bike share support programs that the MPO offers. Of those 5, 4 being for replacement of existing stations, and 1 for expansion of the Blue Bikes network, and then also 1 microtransit pilot project as well there. There were no applications received for other eligible types of community connections investment, including wayfinding signage, despite the fact that that was a new investment type this year. And I should also clarify that, unlike previous TIP application cycles, the bus lanes and transit signal priority projects that were previously in community connections are also no longer in this program and are now under transit transformation. Despite that reclassification, even though they're not present on the graph here, they also did not see any applications under transit transformation either. So just to move on to the next slide and kind of talk about the criteria at a very high level and how we're seeing things. And as I will get to at the later date slide, this isn't the last discussion we're going to have about those projects I just rattled off. We'll have a full list of projects to disclose to the public around March 7th and to share more in March, especially as details are finalized. But with regard to the bike and ped programs across those 5 projects I mentioned earlier, the projects so far are scoring within 15 points of one another. Now, why is that important and why do I bring that up with this new criteria? While we can expect that scoring gap to widen, the idea here is that when you have a spread, but a smaller spread of points among different projects, there's more differentiation happening on those projects. However, when there is a large gap between different kinds of projects, let's say 30 or 40 points, that may mean that the criteria is overemphasizing certain areas and not so much that a project may be without merit. In this case here, the fact that there's 15 points also helps to differentiate projects when it comes to selecting them in the MPO programming scenarios here. And as I'll get to as we get onto the next slide, because I will be doing this for each of the investment programs as well, this becomes increasingly important when we consider the fact that the Boston Region MPO represents 97 different municipalities, and they are all very different communities. Complete Streets has the best data set to work with to kind of show this in real time. And because Complete Streets is also the most broad-reaching program in terms of what project types are eligible under it, a 25 to 30 point spread between the current minimum score and the current maximum score, and again, these are tentative because it's draft, is actually pretty good. While the equity multipliers for these projects haven't yet been applied, and that may either widen or narrow the gap, the Complete Streets program has historically seen spreads on projects from 30 to 40 points. And one of the reasons why that was often the case was that historically, smaller communities performed worse than larger communities because they had fewer opportunities in order to try to get those points that the larger communities could. The idea here is that while we're still prioritizing the same kind of values that reflect the MPO's visions and goals, namely with regard to prioritizing Complete Streets investments, proximity and access to housing, healthcare facilities, and other critical community locations, the scope of work has more bearing on whether or not the project earned points. A good project in a small town can be just as good as a good project in a big town. And that's something that, while we can't say that this criteria is perfectly addressing that, the lack of as much gap in the projects suggests that we're getting closer to that. If we can move on to the next slide for intersection improvements, this one is a similar kind of echo of the bike ped programs, but I would also say that it is indicative of how different projects and different community types can still be a factor in a spread there. There's about a 30 point spread between 3 design projects right now, one of which is in a more suburban community, 2 that are more in a lower density suburban community, and 1 in an inner core city. Hence why there is this kind of difference between each of them. However, one of the things that's important here, why I think we're still seeing some variation in scoring, again, these are draft scores, is something that came up in the Community Connections programs, which I'll get to after this. The idea here is the differentiation between a point project and an area project. Something that's very important to consider once scores are finalized in March is that larger projects tend to pick up more points, and that's because they tend to be closer to more things because they are larger. Historically as well, a point project therefore has less opportunity to do more things if it is constrained in area. If we can move on to that next slide, I'll talk about how this kind of has emerged in the Community Connections program historically. So with the Community Connections program, the scoring criteria there was generally uniform across all investment types there. So bike lanes, bike racks, microtransit, signal priority, all had the same criteria set. What this led to last year was score variances of around 50 points between all of them, which meant that while that was helpful for getting a lot of projects scored and had a uniform, consistent theme across the Community Connections program, it was not very good for differentiation between like and alike project. The added specificity in the Community Connections scoring criteria that was done this year has helped to tighten that spread. So for example, bike racks, which are still generally sort of subjected to that point versus area project spread, given how many racks you might be procuring, has about a 30-point spread. And the reason why it has 30 points is because we are looking at one community trying to purchase 20 bike racks and one community trying to purchase 1,600 bike racks. That is not hyperbole. With bike share as well, I think you see more of that closer comparison to one another. However, in the other types of Community Connections programs, there have been too few applications in order to really gauge the efficacy of things like the new microtransit pilot project criteria as one example, or bicycle lanes. While we're still seeing good results from projects there, without having more projects to weigh against one another, we can't really determine whether or not we're doing a good job of fully reflecting the scopes of work for these projects. And we hope to be able to address that as this criteria is applied in future cycles.
Ethan, can I interrupt for a second? There are
Yeah, sure.
a few questions in the chat. I just wanted you to note. And also, yeah, and I wanted to reiterate mine. I don't have a sense of what the 30 points or 15 points or 50 points means, unless I have the total. Like what is the, in general, I mean, is it 100 or is it 2,000 or, like what is the?
Yeah, that's a good point. They are all, every investment program is on a 100-point scale now. That was not historically the case, but one of the activities done during the last TIP development criteria cycle was to set everything to a 100-point scale for consistency. That was a good point of clarification as we go forward, because with the next slide on transit transformation, this is a new program. Again, same story here as with those other Community Connections investment types, that being we have one project so far and there's also not enough data to conclude. And also like the Complete Streets program, which, yeah, I know there's a couple of questions in the chat regarding this, which I'll get at the very end of the presentation. There is very broad eligibility for regional transit authorities and the MBTA and those municipalities I mentioned to be considered under this investment program. I would expect that once more applications are received, there will still be a broad variation in score types as we try to compare things like signal priority, bus procurements, system electrification, or facility modernization all against one another with the same criteria set. So with that, I would also like to throw up some disclaimers before we wrap up on this next slide. So one, criteria writers, namely the folks who write the criteria, are fallible, and a project score is not the sole determinant as to whether or not it gets programmed. One concession I'd like to make is that while this criteria is showing a tighter spread between projects, it is also less quantitative than previous years. And while the qualitative debate in data is not necessarily a settled matter, the prior criteria that the MPO also had, it's worth recognizing, was the result of a rigorous year-long process to develop that. So even though there was more variation in the data there, it was still a very good set of criteria. And I think it's important to recognize that. This criteria was developed on a much more expedited timeline, given the adoption of the LRTP this summer and the launch of this criteria this fall. Scores will also change. While we haven't shown any actual projects here today yet, as projects are finalized at the end of this month and proponent feedback is considered. We're going to start getting draft proponent feedback to folks at the end of this week, so expect more info on specific projects in March. And if we jump 2 slides, I can start talking about March. So tomorrow is an MPO board meeting and a TIP process readiness and engagement committee meeting to discuss project readiness updates. The reason why we discuss project readiness updates there is in order to set the tone to determine what new projects may be programmed. The scores of those projects will be at the March 7th MPO board meeting, and I'll also be looking for some time in the coming months to share with you all once again, how those projects fared and give a high-level overview on what projects might be selected. On March 21st, there will also be discussion and voting by board members at that MPO board meeting on preliminary project scenarios, with a final project list selected on April 4th, and on April 18th, a vote to release the draft tip. During different points in March and April, this is subject to the TIP committee meeting tomorrow, there may be further opportunities for discussion through the TIP process readiness and engagement committee there, likely on March 14th and or March 28th as well. In the meantime as well, staff are available to answer any questions you might have on either specific projects or programmatic issues like scoring in general. And this next slide just shows that timeline I just verbally mentioned there visually, so folks have it for some reference. We're about halfway through the development cycle already, and it's only February. We have 2 months left before we have to release a draft tip. So with that, if we can go to the next slide for discussion, I'll just answer some questions in the chat real quick here. So first off, let me scroll up. So as John mentioned in the chat first, the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail Phase 3 project is the construction project that we saw for our bicycle and pedestrian program. So that still is under evaluation as well, and is currently being scored. I think it's also being worked on in conjunction with the consultant and Town of Sudbury. For JR, he just asked, I think, if he could share slides after the meeting, which yes, I will make sure to share these slides with folks just so that they may reference them in addition to the recording here. Franny asked the question on 15 points compared to one another, which was that 100-point range. With regard to the map of where applications come from, that is something that we will be able to share a little bit better once we actually have the full list of projects and their scores ready to publish. There is a project scorecard and description set that we create for the board meeting on March 7th, which shows geographically where all projects are. We do not, however, have a full online dashboard that you could access that could show each of them, though we do maintain some data that shows that. I will say that thanks in large part to the project design pilot that is being reviewed this year, there is a very large spread of which communities are applying for different projects in the tip this time. So again, we have about 30 projects, which is a lot more than last year. And while we have a very low number of construction projects, there's a lot of different kinds of community applying this time around. We have everybody from the largest cities in our region to some very small towns that are also involved here. So it's a good spread, and I'd also like to mention too that as part of scenario development, we also have a lot of towns here that have not historically had a TIP project in the past 10 to 20 years, which is also fairly important as well and will be a factor. John then asked a question about the overlap between the Complete Streets investment program and the Intersection Improvements program, and that is absolutely correct. There is a lot of overlap there. It really is dependent on to what extent the project engages in multiple kinds of activity. Generally speaking, state of good repair improvements to things like the roadway are things that might classify a project as complete streets. However, we do have some intersection corridor projects that may address multiple sites along a road. Similarly, you could say the same thing about bike and ped projects versus complete streets as well, for like the Spot Pond Brook Greenway in Malden, which is mostly focused on adding shared use paths to existing streets, but not touching the streets themselves as far as lane striping. And then AC had a similar question. Complete streets projects are not considered major infrastructure now. They are considered on a case-by-case basis. So there are certain thresholds, namely as defined by the long-range plan the MPO has, where if a project adds capacity to the roadway or previously was above $50 million, it may be classified as major infrastructure. In this case here, projects like McGrath Highway and Rutherford Avenue are classified as major infrastructure, but if they were not, they would be classified as complete streets. It's sort of like a second level or tier on top of that complete streets designation. By the same coin, the MPO's funding of something like Lynn Station or more intensive projects like Columbus Avenue, as another case, could be considered as such. It really is an interpretation of the definition there, less so much a formal item. And I would also add it doesn't necessarily impact the eligibility of the project to obtain funding. Okay, and John McQueen asked a question if benefit from bike share would be greatly limited due to only 8 months of rideable weather and benefit. That is something that you did say climate change aside. So I would say we do usually capture that in the climate change and greenhouse gas reduction estimates. That is another thing that we try to consider when it comes to bike share funding is whether or not the facilities that those bikes use are accessible year round. Not all towns plow their bike paths, for example, but some communities, like I think Natick may for the Cochituate Rail Trail. I'm not entirely certain on that. So in cases like that, we do weigh that. However, right now, a lot of those bike share projects are currently confined to the inner core. That's another thing we're trying to look at with future iterations of the Community Connections program, which might weigh that. All right, I think that gets to all the questions in chat. If folks
Yeah.
have any others, and if we still have time, I'm happy to kind of get to those too.
Sure. So I'm willing to let this segment run another 10 minutes. So if people haven't exhausted all their questions in chat, now it's time. John.
Thanks for addressing those, Ethan. But to kind of continue on that Bruce Freeman Phase 3 question, if we got our 25% design to you in April, May, and definitely the final design to you before the deadline in June, can it be added to the tip?
I should just mention for folks in the call, the only requisite for most projects to get on the tip is obtaining project review committee approval. 25% design thresholds are things that give additional certainty that the project will stay on track, which helps in the evaluation process. When I say certainty, it means that there is less risk to program, not that it will be programmed. With regard to this specific project, it is currently still under evaluation for funding already. It's just that any additional detail that this project, like any other that the MPO has already received, would be appreciated because it helps to make a better score.
Got it. Thank you.
I just wanted to point out, if you notice me, the draft tip is going to come out on April 18th, and I'm going to sneak this into the discussion. We usually make comments on the tip and Ethan, when the draft comes out on the 18th, we'll have 21 days to comment or 30.
Good question. So
Yeah.
officially it's 21 days.
Okay, right.
But we're looking for an endorsement on June 6th. So,
Right.
which is
Yeah.
longer than April 18th to June 6th. So I think that still needs to be discussed internally, but it will be at the very least 21 days.
Right. Yeah, so my point is that we should probably plan on having another meeting before our May council meeting, if the group wants to approve of it, in an official capacity, and also the 3C committee will need to meet before we meet as a group to approve it. So I want folks who are folks to think about being on the 3C committee, and we'll have a discussion about that at our next meeting, and so that we can just really be ready to go when the draft comes out, and if you're not up for it, you're not. I'm not going to push people to do it. I just want to have a good sense of how to allocate time in case I participate in this more than ideally I would want, just to be frank. I'm willing to work on it. Ideally, someone other than me, would take the lead on the group and write our comment letter. But if that's not going to be the case, then I just want to know that I'll need to set aside the time for it, and so that way it won't be a stress factor. But the reason I prefer not to is because I kind of feel that I already have a lot of input into the selection process, so I'm kind of like grading my own work. So I think it'd be kind of good if someone on this group kind of graded the work of what the board has done in terms of selecting projects. So that's it. Anna Christina?
Yes, just really quickly. I know I've been asking this. I feel like I ask it every year, but I understand putting the 25% design, up on the board and whatnot, but the cost from going from 25% design through to 100% design and then construction phase always balloons out of control. So as you're scoring this, are you including contingencies or, adapting something to it every year?
That is a fantastic question, given what
Yeah.
we're talking about tomorrow, for project readiness. So the answer is, as is in the projects and based on their estimates, there are contingencies baked in. In addition to that, there is also a 4% per year inflation factor that has been applied historically by the MPO for many tip cycles now. Naturally, inflation has gone beyond that 4% for some material types in recent years, so we are monitoring that. I can say that at tomorrow's MPO board meeting at 10 a.m. and also the tip process readiness and engagement committee meeting at 1 p.m. tomorrow, both of which are virtual meetings, we'll be going into detail on how some specific projects not only have seen very significant cost increases, either because they've gone from 25 to 75%, or because they just finally reached 25%. But we'll also be talking about how, if a project is getting delayed, if its scope is changing, if it is seeing cost increases beyond 10%, if that means the MPO board should be reevaluating that project, not only underscoring, but also potentially reconsidering whether or not it should be funded. That was another component of the TIP project cost committee products, where that committee determined that a 25% design threshold was one measure for trying to limit risk in the TIP by having that be a threshold for projects to get on, in addition to creating a mechanism by which board members may be able to reevaluate projects that were sort of grandfathered in and may still be kind of getting some growing pains out. The other thing, of course, being that with the project design pilot, we are hoping that by giving municipalities more resources to fund project design, that there is a little bit less volatility in what comes out of the design process. Anecdotally, I'll have more information on this tomorrow in that presentation, but many of the issues that we are seeing with delays and cost increases have unfortunately been the result of a lot of turnover and attrition at municipalities and also at the state level when it comes to navigating some very complex permitting requirements, in addition to the inflationary pressures impacting cost as well.
That actually was a follow-up to that 25. When you were looking at the 25% design, it finally comes in. Is there like right of way and permitting? Is that included in their 25% design?
That is something that may not necessarily be incorporated into the 25, but it is also part of the submission process at MassDOT.
Okay.
It is a major threshold to get through.
Oh, yes.
Generally speaking, if right-of-way plans aren't in hand, it is a high-risk project.
Great. And since I'm part of the what we call the TIPPER, the TIP Project Evaluation Review Committee, yeah, I'm not going to ask any questions here because I'll be to ask them tomorrow. I hope, John.
Yeah, a little bit more on Bruce Freeman or related efforts. How are the DCR rail trails funded? Are they part of the TIP process, or how do they get their funding? For instance, the Mass Central, and in relation to the Bruce Freeman Trail, or let's just say the Sudbury, we have the two rail trails crossing Route 20 within less than a mile of each other, and that's going to happen, as soon for Mass Central. And I'm wondering whether or not the Complete Streets has been applied for their crossing, and also whether it could be applicable or part of the Phase 3 rail trail tip.
Excellent question. So we have recently started having more conversations with the Department of Conservation and Recreation to try to find where the intersections lie between our programs. The basic answer is that we are one of many resources that municipalities have been using to advance their rail trails. Department of Conservation and Recreation has a separate capital projects fund that they use to fund many of the rail trails they operate. However, some of their projects are also joint MassDOT projects. And just as the MPO funds rail trail projects, MassDOT also has a state trails team too, with Pete Sutton and other folks at the Highway Division that are funding things like the Wayside Trail out in Waltham, and the Wakefield-Linfield Rail Trail as well in those communities. In addition to things like the Southern New England Trunkline Trail in Bellingham that DCR has been working on, and the projects that the MPO has funded, there's also other mechanisms that have been used. One big one is utility coordination in right-of-way. I believe Hudson, a portion of the Mass Central Trail in Hudson is currently being built out, I think, through National Grid or Eversource.
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 Yeah.
So that's one of the other factors, and we do try to work with those providers to build off of that. One of the things that actually came up in the project design pilot discussions early on was trying to figure out a better way to coordinate the MassWorks grant funding and the Mass Trails grant programs with the TIP processes there, because there are overlapping objectives between these agencies, even if the funding pools are different.
Are you good, John?
Sort of. The latter part of that question on the specifics of those two Route 20 crossings, for instance, or intersections that are going to be, one's going to be created at the crossing near Lotus Blossom, whatever that, and the other is Route 20 and is it Edgell or Road? I forget the name of the, Route 20 crossing at the intersection near Meadowbrook. That's going to be, they're within a mile of each other. It's going to be a congestion issue and an intersection issue for both. So I just was wondering how those can be factored in. Almost, they're going to be separate timings, I think, but very close to each other. And it should maybe be planned for one project versus, two projects.
Yeah, when it comes to
the timing.
Yeah, when it comes to specific project scopes and phasing there, that is usually a discussion that happens between the town and the consultant and the project manager at MassDOT is assigned. So I am not particularly involved in that.
Yeah.
We mostly look at it from determining what the readiness years are, and those readiness recommendations are made by the project manager usually as well.
Yeah, because we have two Fuss and O'Neill is our designer, and we have one rail trail committee, but Gerald Otler is the DCR project manager.
I think we get the complication of the situation.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to go to Anna Christina because it's going to be the last question on this topic. Thanks.
Thank you.
No problem.
Mine's going to be really fast. I was just going to mention that how do you work with these other funding mechanisms? Because I know Gateway City is also doing a bunch of trails. So I was wondering that was it. I'm just wondering also, like, when you're scoring a project and it comes on, it is, say, a rail trail, and there's all these various funding mechanisms. What happens to the score? If that particular pool of money, if they're scoring their projects too and is scoring high there, do you change your score? That's it.
No, we do not. We do not factor in how other parties are scoring their projects compared to our own.
Okay.
The best benchmark to actually use is MassDOT. As part of project review committee approval, MassDOT also scores their projects. Because for MassDOT, PRC is when a project becomes eligible to get funding. We do a separate process that is often complementary, sometimes more rigorous, but we try not to let decisions that other parties with other sets of visions and goals, even if overlapping, influence our own. What we have been doing, however, is realizing, frankly, how these other programs that towns are using are interacting with one another. A lot of projects that are getting on the tip because of increasing design costs are doing so with their Chapter 90 funding, their MassWorks funding, their Mass Trails grant funding. It's very rare to see a project that entirely comes just from town meeting appropriations because of how expensive these things are becoming. So we are coordinating, and we're trying to figure out ways to make that coordination and especially cross-agency communication happen easier. And it's related to a variety of different activities that we're trying to deploy right now as well.
Great. Thanks, Ethan. See you a lot tomorrow. So looking forward to lots of conversations. And with that, I will ask Ally if 6 or 7 minutes would be a suitable amount of time for her to do a quick introduction of the Vision Zero work that the NPO is planning to do. If you would prefer not to, that's totally fine.
Oh, sure. No, that's great, Len.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I know and have worked with many of you before, but I rejoined CTPS recently as the Vision Zero program manager. And you may be familiar with the fact that the MPO won a $2.5 million grant from USDOT under the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant program. So with that grant, we're undertaking a regional Vision Zero action plan. So things are really just getting started. I started about 4 weeks ago in this role, and I guess I was going to give a little background just on Vision Zero in case that's helpful for people. But basically, it's a policy adopted internationally as well as in many cities and towns in the US, including Massachusetts, Cambridge and Somerville and Boston have Vision Zero plans. But it's basically a shift in how we think about roadway safety, with the belief that deaths and serious injuries on our streets are preventable, and focusing on redesigning streets and enacting policies that focus on changing how the streets operate systematically to prevent not crashes, but deaths and serious injuries that result from crashes. So it's all about slowing vehicles and acknowledging that people will make mistakes on the roads, and the policies and the design of our infrastructure should account for that, and no one should die or get seriously injured as they're moving around their communities. So we, as part of that, one of the first things we did is form a task force. Some of the people here are, well, John, Brendan Kearney is on the task force. I saw another name earlier that I'm not remembering, of someone who is here who's also on the task force. Oh, J.R. Fry. But basically it's about 18 people representing different departments and leaders at the municipal level, as well as several advocacy and community groups, Mass Bike, the Boston Cyclists Union, Massachusetts Healthy Aging Collaborative, as well as MassDOT, the T, and a community representative who works at USDOT. So we just had the first meeting of that group yesterday, and it was sort of an introductory, like, get to know you, relationship building, sort of setting the stage for all of us to work together. But we will be working with them just as one part of the engagement and public outreach around this plan. So they are, a group of people, most of whom have been working in Vision Zero and the safe mobility space for decades, and will be advising us on writing the Vision Zero action plan. And so we're also in the process of onboarding a consultant that will be, augmenting our staff in terms of developing the plan. And once we do that, things will really start to kick off with developing a developing a strategy for public engagement and starting to do more of the safety analysis, analysis of the crash data in the region and all of that. Those are sort of the two main tasks at the beginning, the figuring out how we're going to do engagement and analyzing the data around crashes and injuries and deaths in the region. So
Thank you, Al. I'm sorry,
yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I thought you
No,
were done.
no,
Sorry.
I
Yeah,
was just gonna say, you know, if people have questions now, I'm happy to answer them. And we will also come back to this group at different points throughout development of the plan for more input and, you know, explaining and talking through things with all of you.
Yeah, and we're gonna look forward to those visits. And even though Ali's happy to answer the questions now, we have 15 minutes. So we're gonna move on to the next topics and look forward to talking with Ali more. And so I'm gonna give a very brief chair's report, and that is to say, I would like for the members to kind of consider maybe having a 2-hour meeting next time instead of an extra meeting. The MPO meets twice a month. And so to a large extent, I'm trying to condense like 5 to 6 hours of material into 105 minutes, because I think the MPO meetings are really interesting. It's good to have a recap of a lot of the things that have happened in more detail. And so think about it. And certainly if we do that, I will put things like maybe review of the LRTP needs assessment towards the end. Certainly the things that are higher priority and maybe higher interest will come at the beginning. So if people need to peel off, at the end, you won't be missing anything critical. And certainly anything that requires a vote, a rare vote, will happen at the beginning of the meeting. This is probably something that we do for March, maybe April, depending on how much input we want to do on the UPWP. So just putting that out there. So in the minutes that we have left, let's turn to the chapters 2 or story maps 2 and 3 of the needs assessment to see if people have any comments that they want to make on them. Oops, I just those are my participants window. So if you do, raise your hand. John?
Hi. A problem with this needs assessment and really the LRTP as it is the time frame of the data collection that you have to draw from. It seems to just barely get into or clear the COVID period and really isn't acknowledging any of the changes since COVID, which are evolving. They're significant. For instance, vehicle mileage and congestion is increasing, which from pre-COVID levels and things like that. I don't know how you manage that, except maybe make these conclusions or the actions on the LRTP just provisional and state that you really maybe want to target to 2025, or mid-decade for really looking seriously at what the situation is, the existing situation. That's all.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. And so yeah, we are dealing with that. Also, other fallout from the pandemic. It's just the effect that it's had on human resources. I hate to put that in such a clinical way. But to be a little more soft about it, it's like it's had an impact on staffing. And so it's like there are just delays that are caused by that. And also another thing, which I think is maybe independent of the pandemic, but more a matter of how the 4-year cycle of the LRP lines up with the census. I mean, and so there's some fundamental information that we just wasn't available. I mean, when getting ready, to do the travel demand model. I mean, one thing I know from working with Marty on that. Let me rephrase that. From sitting in on sessions of the TDM development, the travel demand model, is that we're using 2010 data because it just wasn't available at the time that we were working on creating the first iterations of the model, and it was those first iterations that were used for determining or helping us project out to 2050. So yeah, those are valid concerns, John.
Yeah, because on a couple of the comparisons, I saw that the data was pulling from 2017 through 2021, and then another one comparison, they had the information of 2017 to 2022.
Right.
And so it was a little bit apples and oranges. I think one of it was bike share or bike usage or
Right.
things like that.
Yeah.
But again, we're not really able to capture the mobility changes, the real changes that have occurred in terms of employment, destinations,
Right.
stuff like that. So that's just a point to be made.
Yeah. Well, also, I mean, like we see that also though in the state. I forget what the exact term. But we have these standards, for safety, and something else, that essentially we look at these 5-year rolling averages, and that's a kind of standard technique, really, because it's a smoothing factor, and so usually it takes out like maybe 1 year volatilities, it kind of smooths out. The pandemic's different though, and so now with the pandemic being almost like a kind of a phase change, in our conditions, we're just slowly incorporating that into what is probably going to be a new average, completely new average, when we then have a full 5 years post pandemic, so, but yeah,
It was an explosion. I mean, it was basically a decade that blew up a decade. I mean,
Yeah.
it was that significant.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
coming out of it, we're seeing significant changes in terms of occupancies for offices,
Yeah.
things like that. And whatever.
Yeah.
It's
But we're all I think we're all taking things with a big grain of salt at this
Yeah.
point, but you have to do something, and by
Something.
that I mean we have to have some data, or we need to have try to do some analysis of what we have, and hopefully in the process of trying to do some good analysis, we'll learn how to handle these situations where there is big uncertainty, and indeed it is a way of trying to make effective decisions when the uncertainty has really ballooned out, so.
Well, doesn't that point to maybe the importance of beefing up the UPWP and using that platform to really get more current survey and information and tracking information for planning?
Preaching to the choir on that one, but we get the money that we get, and unfortunately, the advisory council, I don't think has any control over how much money is devoted to discrete studies. We can
lobby for it. I mean,
yeah, you can lobby for it.
There's a good reason for it, it would seem. If you're
Yeah.
going to plan,
Yeah,
if you're going to start moving capital investments
Yeah.
already.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I hear you. It's just that I don't think the arguments that we're presenting is anything new, to the decision makers. And so I understand the priorities that are being made. And we should keep in mind too that a lot of we don't get a lot of discrete money or monies for discrete studies, but we are studying like major corridors. So studies that we used to pick or used to see in the universe, and they were essentially decided, or we might have just a couple of big ones to decide between. Those are now just kind of incorporated into the work of the UPWP, and still like the big multimodal studies, that I think we had limited ability to choose between in well-informed way. We now have understood that staff is better at deciding which of those projects are going to be selected. And so that money is now like pulled out of the discrete study bucket, and it leaves less. But I hear you. And if you find someone to whom I should make a appeal, or we should make an appeal, let me know, and I'll be happy, to do that. But I tell you what, I'll trade off that for writing, the 3C letter. Okay. But yeah, I hear you, and yeah. So anything else?
Well, focus some requests through, let's say, Senator Brownsberger. He seems to, I know, but for UPW type funding.
Yeah, but I think that's on the federal level, right? So then we'd have to go to
Well,
one, so I think we'd have to go to,
well, he can
yeah,
talk to, he can talk to Warren and company.
yeah. All right. Well, I'll follow your lead on that. Maybe even walk side by side on, But with respect to chapters 2 and 3, I wanted to draw your attention to Figure 5B, which is community mode share by demographic group. I thought that was a really interesting graph. It kind of shows you how different, like a 2 and 3 vehicle household, or 0 vehicle household, a 65-year-old or older household, those with limited English proficiency, how they are distributed amongst modes, and it's very interesting. And what I would like to see done, if possible, is if we combine various of those characteristics to see how what we get in terms of uses of various modes. And this also kind of fits into the notion of modeling, because what I'm interested in seeing is like what distributions of either population spreads, or mode availability, or any other factors have larger effects on the projections of either mode use or any factor that we're interested in, because these, yeah. I'm sorry, I'm hemming and hawing a little bit because I'm kind of scattered, but I'm gonna go now to the projections or the future needs which are, as Marty says, or as the authors say, are really based more on projections than predictions, or that we should see them as projections more than predictions. Two things. Once again, I'd like to see what factors affect various components of the projections. And I think Marty Milkovich, who's working on the travel demand model, is going to kind of work on that in what's called exploratory modeling, where we kind of change the values of various variables to see what effect they have. But more importantly, I want to get a really good handle on why any given projection is considered better or worse than another, because it's not apparent to me that we compare projections. It seems to me that we get a projection and we may compare the projection to another projection to see if we think it's more reasonable with respect to how we are designing the model, but is there any evaluation of the projection later on? Because it just, yeah, as I said, I just don't have a good handle on why a projection should be more highly valued than other. Because John, you know a fair amount. Franny, you know a fair amount. I just spot at your hand, Franny. I'll come to you. It's like, well, I think we could make informed projections about what the future's going to look like. And so now, how would anyone say, well, your projection is good, but the models is better. I mean, especially if we're not going to do any future evaluation of what the projections were. Franny.
I just want to make sure I'm in the right place of what you were referring to. You were referring to like table, oh, I'm looking at table 1, transportation equity populations.
I was looking at figure 5B in story map 2.
Yeah, okay,
and-
wait, sorry. But
yeah.
anyway, but it made me think of when I was looking at figure 1.
Yeah.
I would love to see this information broken down. It's such interesting information, broken down by MBTA versus RTA communities. I think that would be,
This is table
Really?
1 in story map 2.
well, just, yeah, but any of the sort of population information that we look at in the needs assessment, it would be helpful to see about being able to compare it to where we're providing what kind of service, to see it broken down into MBTA, and even within the MBTA, you know, or it within the MBTA and within the RTAs, whether there's a difference between the core of those, the hubs of those, where there's a lot of fixed route versus the outskirts. It would be
Well,
helpful.
I
And-
hear you. Go ahead. All right.
Not that
And,
this is helpful, but I was just thinking, oh, I'd love to see this that way.
all right. And part of me is inclined to say it might be available. Might just need to look at another map. But even if what I'm thinking is the case, it may not be quantifiable, in the way that you want. By that, I just mean like the numbers may not be added up, and in tabular format in the way you want. Because if you could look at a map with an overlay and then see how the communities are distributed around it, you get kind of a feel for it. But then if you want to say, if you're saying, well, I like to see like a table for any given region, then that'd be an interesting programming challenge.
No, I don't mean
yeah.
a table for the region, but for many of the tables. Oh, I think. Oh no, I don't know if Christina's calling up, but anyway.
I think she's saying bye-bye. Yeah,
Oh,
okay, bye-bye.
bye.
Take care.
Anyway,
See you, thanks.
being able to look at that information, not taking a region and looking at it, but sort of identifying for each community, whether it's in a core or an outskirt, and then comparing the data for those.
Right.
The outskirts all together and the core communities all together, because there's such different service and needs depending on those.
No, that's all true. I think part of the reason I was scattered is that I just had so much that I really did want to say, in the few minutes that we have, and so maybe I'll just send out my notes at some point, or maybe the next time we tackle more of the LRP, we'll come back. I'll circle back to this, but it is 4:15, so it is time to go. So thank you, everybody. I enjoyed this, and I'm a little frustrated because I ran out of time to talk about these assessments. That's okay. We got some really good information from Ethan and from Seth, and so it was time well spent. So with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
And second by John McCrean. So motion to adjourn by Franny and a second by John. Without any objection, we're adjourned.
Thank
Yeah.
you, staff. Thank you for all being here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank